Hi, my name is Rich Lander. I'm a member of the .NET team. I work on .NET Core, which runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And today I'm going to talk to you about ASP.NET Core and how you can use it in Visual Studio for Mac. Visual Studio for Mac is an IDE which you can run, obviously, on Mac OS. The heart of Visual Studio for Mac has always been mobile apps and games. You can build mobile apps with Xamarin for iOS and Android, and you can build games with game engines such as Unity. Now we've extended it so you can actually build ASP.NET Core web apps and web services to run in the cloud. Also, since .NET Core runs on many operating systems, it's important that you have IDE solutions where you're at. So you can open up projects on either Mac or Windows because you may have team members on both operating systems. Visual Studio for Mac was always built as an IDE for Mac, so it uses guidelines and practices as recommended by Apple. So let's talk about what's new in .NET Core 2.0. We released it in August earlier this year. So for Mac users, one of the big improvements is that it now works on Mac OS High Sierra, which was released by Apple a couple months later. We had Mac OS High Sierra support in actually our previews. We tried to make sure that you can use the latest Mac versions even when in previews when you install them. And so that was the case. There's other major improvements in .NET Core 2.0. Performance is a big one. We've heard from many developers that they've seen major performance improvements just by updating to .NET Core 2.0 and not making any other code changes. Another more nuanced change, which you won't see in Visual Studio for Mac, but you will see if you drop to the command line, is that you no longer need to type .NET Restore. It just happens implicitly whenever you type commands like .NET Run or .NET Build. So that's a major improvement to having an iterative and fast flow at the command line. What you will notice in Visual Studio for Mac is that we've added many more APIs. We've added about 20,000 APIs to the product in .NET Core 2.0, and this is all part of us supporting .NET Standard 2.0 in the product. So let's take a look at that. So these are all the API categories that are now supported in .NET Standard 2.0. You'll be very familiar with all these categories if you've built apps with any platform. These are the sort of concerns that you need to look at if you're making web service calls, or you're operating on large amounts of data, or you're trying to write parallel applications, or you're using any kind of primitive data structures. We had a lot of feedback on many of these categories, and so now those are in the product. Okay, let's talk about the web tooling improvements in Visual Studio for Mac. As you know, the web platform is oriented on web standards, so it's really important that you can quickly and easily edit HTML5 and CSS3 files, for example. So when you edit those files, you get specialized editors that give you hints on which tags and elements and parameters are available at which places, so that you always create correct HTML5 and CSS3 files. This is the same experience that you would expect in Visual Studio for Windows, and now it's available in Visual Studio for Mac. Also, .NET Core 2.0 and ASP.NET Core 2.0 just come down through the Visual Studio for Mac updater. You don't actually have to install .NET Core 2.0 on your own. You certainly can. But you can just wait for it to come down through the updater and you'll be good to go. And we intend to do this on a more future-looking basis when other updates come. Docker support is something that's become, or Docker has become really popular in the industry. Docker support is now available in Visual Studio for Mac as well. You can, in any ASP.NET Core project, you can simply add Docker support with a single click. Because we know it's an ASP.NET Core project, we know all the right settings to just give to you. So you don't actually have to know a lot about Docker. You just simply add that support, and then you can start debugging with Docker. Also, once you've done that, you're not stuck using Docker. You can actually switch to kind of the normal way of doing things, or go back to Docker. It's quite easy with a single gesture. So let's actually take a look at those improvements in ASP.NET Core tooling in Visual Studio for Mac. Okay, here we are in Visual Studio for Mac. We're actually on High Sierra, like I mentioned, so the product definitely works there. And so what we're going to do is just look at a couple experiences here. The first is we're going to go into the home view, and I'm going to just show you that you get full IntelliSense. So if we go here, it tells us that a list item is allowable in that state. It helps us create start and end tags, and then we can put some content here, and this would show if we loaded it, but we're actually not going to do that there. Also, we can edit CSS files, we can open them, and then you can see we can add another setting. Let's see, we could add font style, and it tells us all the values that are available there, and now that setting exists in our project, which is great. So it helps us efficiently edit CSS files. Okay, what we're going to do next is we're actually going to launch this site, Hello Azure from VS for Mac, and this will open in the default browser. That's what's happening here. Okay, did everything we expected. Now we want to actually edit one of the values in this top toolbar sort of line there. So we know that we go into the shared area in this particular application, go into layout, and then I'm going to edit this about text. I'm going to say it's about something. What it's about, we're not sure, but it's definitely about something. I'm just going to save. I just did that. I did not rebuild, and I just refreshed the page, and you can see it immediately changed. If we undo that and put it back how it was, you can see again, super fast, which is excellent. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to add Docker support, which I have not yet done with this project. We go here to add, and we click Docker support, and it literally just takes maybe 5 seconds to kind of get set up. It gives us a Docker file and some Docker Compose files, and they're all set up with the right settings, so you're good to go. Here you see the basically launch type. So it says here, Hello Azure from VS for Mac, so that's my normal application. And then I can have a Docker Compose experience. And so if you want to use the Docker support, then you leave it set up like that. You still use the play button to start the application in both cases. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility. And so that's a good sense of some of the new improvements in the Visual Studio for Mac tooling for ASP.NET Core projects. Okay, I hope you like that, and you can see how you would use that in your own projects. Next, I want to talk about how you would create and deploy cloud services with Visual Studio for Mac. So as you saw, it's easy to create ASP.NET Core cloud services. You can create these projects on their own in their own solutions, or you can add them to existing mobile and game solutions that you already have. It works either way. It's super important to have a high fidelity local debugging experience, and so you get that with Visual Studio for Mac. If you want a very, very high level of fidelity, then that's where you would choose Docker, because it guarantees that the local environment and the production one are exactly the same. You can actually deploy to Azure App Service from within Visual Studio for Mac. You can do that for testing, staging, or production. What I like to do is I work on my website, I want to see how it's going to work in Azure, I just quickly deploy it, and then I get an externally facing URL, I can send that to my coworker, and they can see what I'm seeing. I can do that very efficiently and cost effectively. Also, when you deploy from Visual Studio for Mac, you're also deploying to Azure Container Registry. So if you want to use that container image for something else within Azure, you can easily deploy it to another service from Azure Container Registry. This is the sort of experience that you'll see in the Azure portal when you deploy applications from Visual Studio for Mac to Azure. You can see it says Docker container right there. Okay, let's take a look at this experience in Visual Studio for Mac. Okay, so now I want to give you a bit more of a sense on what using Docker looks like in VS for Mac. So as I said, we've got this kind of selection option here between Docker Compose and my app as it regularly is. So we're going to stick to the Docker Compose part. And so what happens when you press play, which you're going to do right now, is you're doing actually a fair bit more than you normally do. What happens is you're actually potentially pulling down base Docker images from Docker Hub, and then you are building an application Docker image on top of that, and then you're actually running that Docker image, and also hooking up the debugger. So that actually all happened very quickly. And so there are a couple ways you can actually tell that it's running in Docker. You're probably noticing that there's nothing super obvious because it doesn't say Docker anywhere, but you'll actually notice that it's running on kind of a very non-standard port. If we were running it the normal way, it would have been 5001, which gives you a hint that it's running locally. Here we have a strong idea that it's running in a Docker container. Another thing we can actually do is we can go to terminal, and then we can actually type docker ps, and we actually see that there's a Docker container that's been running for 57 seconds, and that's actually this one. So that's a pretty strong sense of what's going on. Okay, so, and you can set breakpoints with that, and that all works. The next thing I was wanting to show you is what the publishing experience looks like. So I gave you some sense of that before with the screenshot I shared. What you do now is you click on your project, and then you say Publish to Azure, and then you set up VS for Mac with a cloud subscription. I've already done that here, and in fact I have a set of Azure App Services that I have been using, and I'm going to use this Hello Azure from VS for Mac, and then I would click Publish. That takes maybe like 15 seconds to do, so I'm going to take you back to the browser, and I'm going to show you this Hello Azure from vsformac.azurewebsites.net. This is my project that I've just put up there, and it's now running in the cloud. And so like I said, if you were working on a project with a colleague and you wanted to give them a great sense of how the app was performing and potentially show them a fix you had made, you quickly publish your application to Azure, and you'd be able to do that in a matter of seconds. Okay, I hope you see how that experience really keeps you connected with Azure and the cloud. So you may be wondering how you can get started on all the things that I've shown you. So first, obviously, go download Visual Studio for Mac with that handy URL, akms/vs4mac. You can try out the ASP.NET Core tools that I showed you. This link will take you to some documentation that gives you some tips. And last, you can deploy your new site or service to Azure from Visual Studio for Mac. Again, there's some helpful documentation to help you out. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks for being a .NET customer. Thanks for using Visual Studio for Mac. And I hope you're successful using these new improvements in Visual Studio for Mac in your next project.